People and culture are core to the growth of every organization. And this aspect gains greater prominence in startups, which grow exponentially. Therefore, finding and nurturing the right team is on top of mind of every startup founder and investor. To talk further on this, we have with us today Chaitali Mukherjee, partner and leader, people and organization at PwC India. She works extensively with organizations to deliver their business priorities by enabling people and organization practices, policies, as well as capabilities to help them get ready for the current and the future. Welcome, Chaitali. To start off our discussion, it'll be great to have your views on how the HR function has evolved in the last couple of years in Indian startups.
The strength of a startup and their journey from being a bootstrap startup, to becoming a unicorn, which is a dream that they all have, is to transition from who they are, what they stand for, and eventually wanting to become an enterprise, where again there is a huge transition that they need to do. The role of HR, earlier, startups never thought that they needed HR as a separate function. And we have seen that entire journey where every entrepreneur was very well connected with his or her group of innovators, ideators who were actually working with him or her day in, day out and making the idea happen. Now, from that journey, startups today realize, understand, and appreciate that it's not okay to just believe that I can do it alone. So, while I will do what I will do, it's necessary, but perhaps, as we say, not sufficient, right? So, the role of HR particularly has been carved out as a very critical element of what it can do and should do. That's number one, if you ask me. The second very important piece is what kind of talent are we looking for as a startup, and hence the role of HR. Let's not forget HR is for the people, by the people, and of the people. So if the nature of the talent, the texture of the talent changes, HR has to change. So earlier talent was more, talent that I could get into my reel, my area. Now the talent is everywhere. The nature of problems are such that the talent has actually opened up to be anywhere. That comes with a lot of advantages, but with a huge challenges as well, in terms of models, in terms of contracts, in terms of tax challenges that organizations are facing. Hence, of course, there are newer solutions that executive search firms to staffing firms to gig companies, gig aggregators are coming to solve for that. Yet the internal capability and capacity of HR to solve and think about it differently will be a very important one. And finally, the last thing is compensation. That has become a very, very important problem, or should I say, not problem, but a USP or a value proposition that startups need to have it pretty well defined. And the role of HR has actually evolved into just managing it to being novel about it. So I think to me, the role of HR has changed from enablement, managing, to defining the direction in which the startup could possibly go.
We find that startups have revolutionary founders who challenge status quo and businesses, but building the right teams are equally important. How can startups go about building these teams and also focus on succession?
The journey of the startup is about scale. It can't be done alone. And if it can't be done alone, the role of team becomes that much more important. And according to me, Amit, if you would ask me what has made some of the biggest startups succeed, and we can see umpteen examples, it has been, of course, because of the novel idea and the unique problem that they are solving, but it has undoubtedly been about the team that they are able to create. Now, there's a very interesting thing about this team. At different stages, and depending upon the maturity of the startup, you will need different people, different teams. And from the conversation of team, it is not just about bunch of 8, 10, 15 people who came into it right at the start, right? It is about having dreaming similarly, having the same aspirations, viewing the same vision for the organization. And that's where succession actually becomes a very important one. For any successful startup to become a larger startup or an enterprise, it becomes imminent, literally, for them to think of succession in a very different way. Because if I want to build a sustainable enterprise into the future, I need people who are homegrown, like any other organization. And that's where the focus on mindset, who are the people I am actually getting on board, will become that much more critical. So I think to your question, why should startups focus on succession or what's the role of team? If I'm not looking at just building a startup, but a startup which will tomorrow become a very large enterprise, it will not happen just because of me or my chosen few. It will be because of batches of talent that I'm actually able to build. And that's where succession will be super critical. How can we go about doing it? I think it will have to be, it takes all kinds to build my organization. So, not just looking at my clones or trying to get my kind of clones, but valuing the capability and the mindset that's required to build both new ideas as well as scale. I think this is a very critical one because cognitively everybody gets it that, my early few of 8 or 10, 15, 20, whatever that number may be, may not actually be able to help me scale and become what I aspire to become. However, that mindset of transitioning from that 8 or 10 to many is a very big journey for the founder himself or herself. Let's understand where this comes from. Psychologically, the idea is very close to me, and everybody who is associated with that idea, they mean a lot to me because as they say, it's the entire family trying to raise the child, and the idea here, the organization is that we have created, and the idea that we are nurturing is the child. Now, when you're inducting more people into it, it needs exactly the same capabilities, characteristics, and mindset that one needs when you're inviting a new member into the family. You have to be open to that person. You have to be open to the importance and the role. And the new person coming in does not make the existing people less important, less valuable. It's not a replacement journey. Sometimes it may be, but the replacement is more about responsibility replacement rather than an individual replacement. So I think that's the journey that organizations will need to have. It's easier said than done. We can do it. We all have seen in personal lives when a new member enters the house, for that one person, how much adjustment everybody has to do. Similarly, I think for startups, the passion is so high in the initial few that our association is with that passion and the person's tenure with us. But we should also realize we will need different capabilities, different people, and hence this adjustment is important not for us, but for the idea that we all are so passionate about. And this has to be made almost like a process, which basically means every time we are having conversations, let's stick to the issue, to the skill, to the problem, and the missing capabilities rather than the individual's understanding or tenure. And these are some small examples I'm giving, but having done this with a few companies, we realize it's a journey and it's a journey of continuous practice that needs to be done.
Thanks, Chetan. As a follow up to that, can you share a few ways for founders to transition from their initial core team to include others in the CXO positions with the right competencies?
The employee value proposition is something that startups have always felt uh, is the consistency in the language of the founders, co-founders, and the initial few employees. So one of the things that we have experienced in our journey of trying to define this with some of the startups, or also hearing it through when we are doing host of other work with them, has been about what does the organization offer, aspects of culture. What does the organization give you in terms of learning, aspects of career, and of course, the opportunity to solve a big enough problem and add purpose to who you are, what you're doing, not just from a career perspective, but overall purpose perspective. I think ensuring that some of these aspects are part of the value proposition that the startup is curating or defining when it goes to the external market to attract talent is super critical. Needless to say, startup founders are really good at it because they are first sellers before even the idea. Because the fact is, many people get an idea. The fact that the idea gets converted and then gets transmitted to an enterprise or an organization proves the fact their ability to think and execute. So I'm sure that startup founders don't need this piece of advice. Yet, our learning from the work, Amit, that we have been doing with organizations is two or threefold. Number one, the experience that I'm giving to my employees has to live up to my purpose and has to live up to my brand. So if I'm a tech-enabled startup, and just imagine if the experience that I'm giving to my employees itself is broken, what would it actually mean? So from a value proposition perspective, the first and the foremost piece, which we are also seeing organizations are doing, of being able to simplify, getting the experience piece right for my employees. So that's a very, very important one. The other important piece, and I'll call out maybe three, four pieces. One is getting the experience right. The second is the vision and the purpose that the organization or the startup wants to have in the long term, and translating that into what does it mean for its people. This has to be simple, articulate, and yet very, very impactful and effective. Something that the organization cannot actually afford to change multiple times. So I think that's going to be a very important one. The second very important thing is the role of rewards, and how am I designing my rewards depending upon the maturity of the organization, something that I spoke about. We have to be very clear that the startup journey is not for the short term. While we could be working 25 hours in a 24 day, it may seem almost like near milestone, but the journey is much, much longer if we are looking at building sustainability. And hence, continuity of what kind of talent I will need throughout, continuity of what kind of rewards can I give in the longer term, all of this becomes very important. So thinking for current, but also ensuring it does not make me irrelevant in the later time, because then course correction actually takes away from my brand. The whole culture that the organization needs to be cognizant of as a startup as we scale, and not leaving it all to the founder's style is super critical, and hence getting processes, getting practices, and a way of ensuring that it is replicable. And finally, the last one is, how can organizations which are scaling at the pace at which they create space for talent that's not the early ones, but are also super critical for the business going forward. The mindset that is required in a startup is, of course, entrepreneurial, and we hear it all the time. But at some point in time, when I'm scaling, I will also need the manager's mindset. So there's the entrepreneurial mindset and the manager's mindset need to coexist. We need to know how we get them to coexist. Only then will my startup actually be able to become what it needs to become. So according to me, these are some of the things that, Amit, we are, and you are aware, solving with a bunch of startups as they're thinking through how they get away from who they are and what they want to become in terms of size and scale.
Coming to the question about the role of compensation and rewards in success of a startup, and how does this tie up into a startup's overall value proposition as an employer? Should a startup's rewards philosophy differ from an established corporate?
So, Amit, let's take the example. A startup came to us and said that, in our journey of becoming uber quick, we have been doing a host of things using technology. But the net result is my employees today suddenly feel that their experience is all patchy. How do we ensure that for what we stand, we don't take away the experience from our employees? So that's a very interesting example of understanding. Many a times we are taking those decisions to solve the problem today to the degree that I think it is needed to be solved. But the moment I realize that it is coming in the way of the experience of my employees, how do I actually go and manage that entire thing well? So that's a very interesting example that I can think of. Another very critical one that we've been discussing with a host of startups is, of course, getting the whole rewards right, depending upon the maturity of the organization. What should they do? What they shouldn't do? Also, looking at different kind of contractual arrangements as they're looking at talent in the outside market. And finally, the last one, which many founders have come back and discussed, which is around my culture of being entrepreneurial, now it's coming in the way of me being able to scale. So how do I not take away the entrepreneurial culture from my organization, yet at the same time ensure that I don't make it so difficult for people because they don't have access or they don't have, they haven't been away here for long enough, is a very important one. And I think the other one that I must call out, uh, when a startup is about 200 to 50 people, the founders, co-founders, the core team can yet know people by name, they can know them for the skills, so on and so forth. When that goes to 1000, 2000, 3000, that will not be possible. But let's not forget, the DNA of the people who are joining the startup, even when it is 1000 people or 1500 people, are exactly the same that may have joined when it was 100, 150, which is around career, which is around recognition. They're all young people many a times. How do you institutionalize that part of recognition, of quick career growth, understanding the competencies that they are bringing to the table so that they don't get hidden behind only the known few in the organization? It's a fascinating piece of work we did for one of the startups, which is a unicorn now, and at some point in time we'll love to share. But I think these are some examples, Amit, which can be very useful.